Jakub Mamulski here. Let's say that one day you wake up, proceed with your day as usual, and then suddenly an idea comes to your head. I want to create an esports tournament from the scratch. Let's be honest, it probably doesn't happen, but there are some people who do organize esports events and design tournaments. I've designed a couple of them, so I think that I'm the right person to explain what you should do in order to create your own esports event. The series I've dealt with include, but are not limited to, the Sim Racing and FIFA divisions of the Polish Esports League, Polska Liga Esportowa, and Polish Mobile League, Polska Liga Mobilna. Before we get into the topic, don't forget to subscribe and to hit the bell icon. Give this video a thumbs up if you want to learn more and more about the world of video game marketing. Esports are often just that, looking at you Fortnite, so I kinda feel like I am in a good position to talk about them on the channel. Also, this video would take a very long time to have the script prepared and would generally be very long if I were to talk about all of the aspects of creating an esports event, so I'll divide it into 2 or 3 parts. Since we are through with this stuff, let's get right into the topic. You decided you want to host an esports event. That's great, but there isn't a lot to the thought itself. You need to specify some key aspects before you even operationally begin preparing the event. The most important stuff you need to figure out is the scope, the game, the costs and money, the format and administration, the infrastructure, the marketing, the players, and ultimately the goal you want to achieve. It's a lot of stuff, so either get a team to do that, outsource it, or take a lot of time, because the better prepared you are, the bigger your chances of holding a successful and profitable event are. While I haven't worked long in the esports sector, this stuff is all pretty intuitive. There is just a lot of it to manage, so you definitely will have to track your work and goals, as it's easy to get overwhelmed with all of this stuff. As I have no clue who you are, I won't be able to focus on a single approach. You might be a kid who wants to host a small League of Legends tournament at your school after hours with your history teacher as a supervisor and judge, a bloke who wants to expand his game dev studio's marketing operations, someone who wants to start an esports agency, or most likely a person who just wants some random hum in the background. Because of this, I'll try to cover some of these topics deeply but generally, you know what I mean. So let's get into the first thing, the scope. The scope in this case specifies the most important and defining characteristics of your esports event. The things to consider include if it's going to be pro or an amateur event, what game or games are going to be featured in the event, is it going to be online or offline, if you are going to earn or not on this event, whether you want to broadcast or record it or not, and to ensure whether you need a license to conduct the tournament or not. Obviously, this point doesn't really apply if you are trying to host an esports event for your own game. The answers to these questions will determine an awful lot of the stuff you'll have to take care of in the later parts of organizing the event. You know, the costs, the format, and so on. This is also a good time to figure out the first deadlines. Try to be realistic, and unless they are set in stone, keep them only for internal use. The game. The game is arguably the most important part of an esports event. Aside from the obvious thing that is the attractiveness of the game, there is a couple of things you need to consider. The things you need to pay attention to are the multiplayer modes of the game, the platform, thus the necessary hardware needed to play the game, Licenses, which will determine the legality of your esports event. Keep in mind though, they won't really be that important when you're just trying to make a cool LAN party that will not be meant to earn money. How the game performs in its multiplayer modes. Some games, like most fighting games with delayed based netcode, perform so poorly online that they are either not viable as an option for online events or just barely viable. And extremely important for online events is spectator mode. When you have a host running the event, a spectator mode makes it just easier to stream, broadcast, judge, and verify the stuff that goes on in the tournament. It is possible to have an online event without a spectator mode, but it usually entails having the players stream the tournament and then using OBS to screen capture their feed in order to primitively restream it. It works, but it's not as simple as the spectator mode. It also doesn't allow for the level of technical consistency during streaming that the spectator mode allows. And games without a spectator mode would make the most sense if all players see the same thing on their screens, like in fighting games, or if they play on a split screen or in the hot seat mode. In other words, where only one device needs to have screen capture enabled in order to showcase the experience as well as possible. 3 other important things are the showiness of the game, the skill required for an esports level play, and marketability if you're in for the money. The showiness describes how fun a game is to watch. I kind of think of it as a parabola. On both ends, there are titles that aren't good for watching because they are either too boring, like Please Don't Kill Me, Farming Simulator, or too crazy, like Guns with a Z, to watch for general audiences. Titles like, say, Quake, Street Fighter, Dota, or even Heroes of Might and Magic 3 all fall somewhere in that parabola, and they can make for a fun watch, which can be appealing to wide audiences. I also want to clarify that niche esports are great as they often involve a very passionate community. They just aren't really fun for the people who aren't engaged in the game or who don't play it. Remember that some games, for example Pokken Tournament, can be very fun to play but really awful to watch, despite having stuff that makes it a very good esports title in theory. The skill required for an esports level play really influences 2 things: the number of competitors in your series and the number of potential players that will try to enter the esport in the future. Looking at various games and various series, the obvious thing to say is that the games that are easy to pick and play but hard to master are what most people opt for, and you would be right. However, some titles that are mechanically simpler by design than others, like say CSGO compared to Quake Live, are often more successful in the esports market. I think it comes down to the execution difficulty, the number of variables and consistency in awarding the victory to the best player or the best team. Bunny hopping into a grenade jump into a railgun aerial frag is effective as hell, but it's also confusing if you don't understand what's going on. On the other hand, let's say camping in CSGO is way easier to understand. Stay in a place, aim at a point, shoot when an enemy appears, and that's it pretty much. Both require raw skill, but people would much rather watch and play CS than QL, and it boils down to which skills are exploited to which level. QL demands great aim, proper execution of movement techniques, some knowledge of the maps that they play at, and is less predictable than CSGO. CSGO, on the other hand, demands great aim, and aside from that it has barely any other mechanics and systems that could influence the regular course of gameplay, so it has a lower mechanical execution skill required to play well, while it emphasizes teamwork and knowledge of the maps way more than QL ever does. Being less extreme and more methodical allowed CSGO to reward the best players to consistently win more due to what would matter the most in real life, which is the steady aim and tactical thinking, not necessarily frame-perfect movement and having a lot of mobility dependent on what is sometimes just sheer luck. After all, there are other people who would like to pick up the rocket launcher. CSGO is therefore more consistently allowing the best team to win the most matches, and despite requiring less skill, emphasizes different and probably more enticing types of skill than QL. Marketability is an odd one because it really depends on what you want to achieve. There are two main things that can be considered in this aspect. One of them is brand power and recognizability, and the other is money. The first one is pretty simple. Games with established esports and with big communities are going to be the safest bet when it comes to organizing an esports event. Dare I say, one title is the easiest of them all if you want to get a license, and it's League of Legends. A huge player base, the right amount of skill required for high-level play, a well-known brand and an established and decentralized esports scene make this title probably the best one in terms of marketability and business perspectives. CSGO and Dota 2 are less marketable, but they are still very good and you should be able to promote these in most markets. You have to consider how these brands are perceived in the markets that your event is going to cater to. For example, holding a Dota 2 event targeted towards the Polish market doesn't make a lot of sense, as the MOBA market is dominated by LOL. While it comes to other titles, I'm not saying they aren't viable, but the chance of widespread success is definitely smaller than in the case of the three I mentioned in this segment so far. There have been successful fighting game tournaments, FIFA tournaments, RTS tournaments, sim racing tournaments. I was even in charge of a Brawl Stars esports series once and it worked well. The other aspect of marketability is money, and it demands a separate segment, and it's way more complex than just brand recognition and general business viability. So let's move on to the costs and money. These two factors are what is going to determine an awful lot when it comes to your event. You have to figure out a couple of important things that we'll talk about in detail a bit later, but let's start with a list. Is your event going to make money? If it's going to do so, how the money will be earned? Are you going to earn enough money to justify getting a commercial license for the event? What are going to be the costs? How big the costs are going to be? Will you be able to manage the event, stream it, host it, and take care of the infrastructure for free? Let's talk about these points in detail now. So, is your event going to earn money? Let's make it relatively short. If it's not going to earn, you have to keep it either free to make, or you have to have enough money saved to cover the costs. While it's not a big problem for small events, this approach is not viable if you want to build a big esports series or a franchise. If you want to earn money, you'll have to consider a couple of things like taxes, sharing the money across the team, spending money on infrastructure, wages, prizes, and next events you are going to organize, etc. Your local laws are applicable here, so you need to figure these ones out as well. How the money will be earned. There are two major ways to earn money in the world of esports. You can either earn money by having sponsors, or by having people paid to join the tournament as competitors or as spectators. Let's get the second one out of the way. It's not the most viable option, especially for small events. The devs of the games that are used during tournaments can also actively oppose having entry fees in any form. So you need to ask the person who is responsible for dealing with esports on their end. Is also probably written in the guidelines if they happen to have such a document, if it's possible and allowed. Let's talk about the more popular way of securing the bag: sponsorships. Sponsors are parties that are willing to pay an agreed amount of money to the organizer of the event, or to give or lend some specified goods like consoles or screens. In return, they want their brands to be promoted to some extent, and it really can vary. I'll talk about the Assetto Corsa tournaments I used to organize for the Polish Esports League, along with the Republic of Sim Racers. In 2019, as an example, as this event had a lot of stuff and spaces that could be monetized. I'd divided the fields of monetization into two categories: the stuff that was outside of the game and the stuff that was inside the game. The first category is more general in its nature, so it can be applied to a big number of esports events. The sponsor's logo and branding could be used in the title of the series. It could also be placed during broadcasts, as, for example, intermittent ads, and by this I mean video clips that would interrupt the broadcast, and the organizer and the sponsor usually agree on a set number of times or the total time the ads will be displayed for. All their logos can be displayed on overlays. The hosts can also mention the brand on stream, and sponsors could also be featured on the chat, as we broadcasted on Twitch, where we could send links that directed people to their shops and whatnot. I also want to mention the fact that sponsors usually demand the organizer to have their ads achieve a certain reach, so it could be like this: we'll give you 2,500 euros and you will make our brand gain 500,000 impressions. These are pretty general things that could be done with an esports series monetization. The game we had there, though, Assetto Corsa, allowed us to sell sponsor placements on car liveries and on the track walls, as these aspects of the game could be easily modded. And let me tell you, sending a mock-up of a corner at, say, the Hockenheim track with a brand's logo on the walls to a potential sponsor is a very powerful sales move. Getting back to selling these placements and services to sponsors, you need to take care of two aspects: compliance with the game's guidelines regarding advertising and actual sales. When it comes to compliance in general, you would want to avoid companies that are either controversial, are competitors of the company of which the game you play, or of a sponsor, or are just irrelevant to the audience. The first one is not really set in stone, as some controversial products are allowed to be advertised, and some products are going to be in demand of certain audiences, but you generally want to avoid companies from these industries: the tobacco industry, the alcohol, especially liqueurs industry, the firearms industry, the medical industry, the data processing industry, the legal industry, and the sex industry. I'm not saying that these industries are to be avoided at all costs, because I could see, say, Winchester Repeating Arms Company being a titular sponsor of a hunting games esports events, but it is very rare, and some activities regarding advertisements and promotion of certain industries can be limited by law, so you need to be compliant with that too. The part with competitors of the company is simple. You wouldn't promote Mortal Kombat at a Street Fighter event, would you? You also want to make sure that your sponsors aren't cannibalizing on each other. You could earn more money once, but the brands that would be insufficiently showcased probably wouldn't like to work with you in the future. So if you want to make it into a sustainable business, this is a bad practice. The third one is pretty self-explanatory. Trying to advertise dental prosthetics adhesives during a CSGO esports event probably isn't going to generate any noticeable sales for the sponsor, and you will have your time wasted on building a business relationship that was pretty much doomed to fail, as the brand or the product of the sponsor wasn't relevant to the viewers. Let's briefly talk about sales now. And this is a huge topic, and there are better salespeople than me, so I'll describe how acquiring a sponsor works. Get a phone, a working computer with access to the internet, and create a short but nice presentation that will contain the most important info about your event. You have your leads, you can think of them as potential sponsors. You need to contact them in order to figure out if they'd be up for cooperation. You should usually be in touch with people responsible for branding, marketing, brand cooperation, or the upper management if possible. You'll have to pitch your idea to these people, so you'll have to figure out some things important for the lead, like the target audience, the projected reach of your event, the costs, possible services and placements, and so on. If they like your idea, and by this I mean if you convince them, sign a contract with them, and always keep their interests in mind, as they are the ones who pay for your endeavors. Remember not to sell stuff that is impossible to achieve, as you could land in huge financial trouble if contractual penalties are high, or if you have no money to begin with. If you are successful and if you want to hold more events in the future, remember that it's always easier to sell to people with whom you have worked previously if they were satisfied by your delivery. This is why esports agencies are struggling less and less with sales the longer they stay on the market, because they are able to build profitable and meaningful business relationships. This is already a lot of info, and I have to stop writing and recording for now. As I mentioned earlier, this video will be split into parts, so the second part, and possibly the third, will appear on my channel relatively soon. After I'm through with this project, if there is demand, I'll record another video that will be a response to comments, questions, and will contain clarifications if they are needed. Hopefully you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. If you'd like to hire me for a project, or if you'd like to follow me on social media, head over to my LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks for watching, have a great day. Cheers.